It is 9 o'clock and we have lots to do. Or you have lots to do. I'm the president. Welcome everybody. My name's Alan Davis. I have the honor to serve as President and Vice Chancellor at KPU. The smart people have not yet arrived because they saw on the program that there were going to be welcomes and platitudes from the higher ups. There's not very much of that, but I've always skipped that when I see a conference. I'll sleep in. If there's half an hour of platitudes from people who really don't know what they're talking about, then the real program starts. That's when I arrive. So welcome anyway. Thank you so much for being here. Apparently, Don Presant to my right here, if you don't know Don Presant, this is him. He and I had a conversation once around some conference where he was trying to entice me to go to another conference, which we did, all around the theme essentially of a more authentic and more appropriate and more valid way to assess and record and document people's learning, informal, formal, etc., etc. And we've talked about e-portfolios and badges ever since then, and I'm really pleased. Apparently, I said, well, we should host a summit at KPU, and here we are. So I don't remember doing that, but I'll take the credit. This has been organized by our Center for Teaching and Learning, Stephanie Chu, Meg Godine over here, and Catherine at the front desk. That's really the team, and thanks to them for pulling this together so easily and quickly. I do actually, although I'll give you the platitudes, this is a great institution and you're all wonderful people. I do come by this somewhat authentically, having explored these topics myself and spoken about them. And I'm just about to teach a course for the University of Manitoba online. It's my first experience. It's quite interesting. If I didn't have Meg Godine helping me, I'd be completely lost. But it's about leadership, which is, if you know me, is quite amusing. People are going to come and try to learn about leadership. But I've very quickly tried to get the course oriented towards the future. And what is the future of higher education going to look like? And what is the leadership required in higher education? Because, you can talk about leadership then and as it is now in the current situation and in the traditional situation. But I think the leadership needs are going to change, as is everything else. So I like to think that I stay current, and I try to kind of keep up with you guys, although it's increasingly difficult as a president. There are some very serious people in the room. My good friend David Porter from eCampus Ontario, Doug Shepard from Delta. We haven't met, but your name comes up a lot through the portfolio conversations. Victor at the back there is an old friend and colleague who does a lot of great work around the system. So we have a very, very experienced group of people here, and I'm sure if you're new to the game, you're going to learn a lot, and if you're well embedded in it, I hope you have a lot to share. I'm going to get out of the way now so you can get on with your meeting today, and perhaps I'll just hand it over to you to tell them what's going to happen next. Don Presant, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Alan. That's evidence that you really have to be careful what you say around me because I write it down and I follow up. I like to call myself pleasantly persistent. We have a very action-packed day set up for you today. We're going to try a lot of different things with you, and likely some of them won't work, some of them will work, and hopefully you'll come away with some ideas in terms of how to think in terms of open recognition. And I think that would be the key theme we'd be hammering on today is open recognition, how digital open badges can provide recognition of what someone knows and can do, and is much more than sticker charts, much more than digital dog biscuits. So that's the overall agenda here, and I'll just say that it's broken up by a lot of interactivity, a lot of breaks, hopefully some good networking opportunities for all of you. I just want to say before things get underway that having folks like Alan, having folks like Stephanie, and an institution like Quantland is just crucial for something like this. And I really have to say I'm touched by the trust that's been shown in partnering with us on the event today. Just a bit of housekeeping here. Wi-Fi, for those of you who don't know already, it's KPU guest, and what you have to do then is open a browser, provide your mobile number, and it'll give you a code to get on. We are, if you're tweeting, it's hashtag BadgeBC. I'll be interested to read that Twitter feed afterwards. I will say that, oh, you can't quite see that. We have that's an Etherpad that we'll be referring to later in the day. Basically, this is something I learned from Mozilla and the Badge Alliance community calls. It's a collaborative pad that people can work on. And if someone who's well connected can get on that Etherpad, we'll be asking you to make maybe 3 bullet points on your breakout of things, conclusions made, etc. So if you can check that out. And then after this event is over, we are badging the so-called instigators at the event here, but we'll also be badging people who want to reflect about what they learn here. And again, I'll go back over. We'll show you what that looks like later. And the symbols on the side, basically, this is very much a cross-sectoral event. A lot of people from post-secondary here, certainly, but there are people here from K-12, people here from the not-for-profit sector, and people here from government, and from industry and business. And hopefully that this will help you build some bridges, and so we can talk about connecting the silos for basically lifelong learning and development. So, which brings me, well, a little ahead of time to the point where we're basically going to take you through what open badges are, because how many people would say they know what open badges are at this moment in time? Okay, so that's about half to a third to a half. That's great. So some of this will be familiar to you, and unfortunately, I can't recognize your learning this morning until it's all over. But we're going to give you a bit of a primer. I'm working with, very honored to be working with Nate Otto, who's the lead architect for the open badges at IMS Global, lead technical architect. He's the person that shepherded the standard. You may remember him as Executive Director of Badge Alliance. He shepherded the standard from version 1.1 to version 2.0, which is, I think, due to go live March 1st. It's going to be signed. Great. So, so right now, Nate and I can basically take you through what are open badges, and that'll set the scene for some examples that we're going to be providing you. We have a number of instigators, some stories here, local stories, or as I heard in a coffee shop yesterday, global stories of open badges or stories that can be improved by open badges, and then some breakout sessions to really try these ideas out. Actually, I wanted to go back. Let's talk about the design tools up the top right. On your tables there, you'll see some Post-its, and that's actually something we would like you to be working on as Nate and I talk now, because as you listen, we'd like you to be thinking, okay, what's good about this? What are some possible downsides about this? What are some opportunities? What are some threats? So sort of a SWOT analysis. We'll have you post those in our first interactive session after. So that's one tool. Another tool is the so-called badge canvas, and that's the 11 by 17 papers that you see there. These were developed by Digital Me in the UK initially, based on something for entrepreneurial training, basically getting you to think through why you're doing it, who's it's for, and who will value them. And then the cards, I haven't mentioned those. Those basically just something to thumb through while you're waiting for something to happen. And some great ideas from the Sprout Fund in Pittsburgh and from organization Nate used to be with. Actually, you designed those cards, didn't you? Yeah. The other set of cards with the what is it? DPD. What does that stand for?
Design Principles Documentation Project, which was out of Indiana University, studying 30 different badge systems. We distilled a set of I think it's 38 design principles across 4 different categories that are sort of a mix and match recipe book for designing a program that uses open badges.
And then in the afternoon, we'll be returning to something that looks like the badge canvas. It's called a network canvas, the idea that how can you take your possibly standalone badge system and make it communicate out to other communities and other sectors, possibly across a region. So I haven't put that out yet. So open badges. So this is where we tell you to SWAT while we sweat in front of you. And so I'm just going to frame things initially, and then I'll hand over to Nate to get into the nitty gritty under the hood in terms of open badges. It's still very, very much at a high level. Skills gap. People tend to talk about skills gaps, what is meant by a skills gap. Basically, this is a slide that varying perceptions between employers and graduates, or whether people have skills such as working with others, such as staying current on technologies, etc. So the light blue is the students, and the dark blue is employers, and there's a bit of a gap there. This is something from a document that was developed for association learning, and basically saying there's basically a storm building in terms of the cost of education, the number of people who are actually completing degrees, the level of unemployment, and the number of non-traditional students there are in the system. They're not serial students anymore. And the world of work, the so-called VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, so that the skills you started school to get, by the time you graduate, they may be obsolete, or at least a good proportion of them may be obsolete. So that sort of waterfall way of dealing with skills isn't really good enough anymore. This is this is from a Time Carnegie study, basically saying, what is the purpose of education? The general population tends to think it's to gain skills and knowledge for a career. The post-secondary community tends to think it's to learn to think critically and be good citizens. There is overlap there, but there's also a gap. This is basically a depiction of the complexity of the world. Things don't fit into tight categories. There's a lot of round pegs and square holes out there, and there's a lot of sort of making it up as you go along, which is, I think, what Alan was referring to with his leadership course. This is World Economic Forum basically talking about the kinds of skills that they see are needed. This is what they think about in Davos. And basically, they don't tend to be, although employers often say they want specific technical skills, really what's happened, 3 months from now, those would be different technical skills. What they want is people who can learn continuously and leverage value from each other. Here in Canada, this is Business Council of Canada thing, basically talking, I can hardly see it. Again, it's the soft skills. It tends to be the soft skills, the ability to work across multiple subjects, handle many things going on at once, resilience, etc. And which brings us to the idea that you don't tend to learn all these things in a formal learning setting, or you don't learn all of them in a formal learning setting. Typically, you frame things in a formal learning setting, you get people to talk to each other, and then you basically get them to apply it in the world of work. So that ramp diagram right there in the middle, that's from an organization called Deakin Prime, which does continuing professional studies down out of Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. And essentially, they have built this into their learning program. Start formally, get people to connect to each other and sort of a connectivism kind of approach, and then provide them with tools and coaching, et cetera, so they can apply it out in the real world. Over on the right there is a little diagram. I tend to cram too much in my slides. But this one basically talks about the ROI. It's a lot easier to do it that way than it is to try and teach everybody everything formally, and you get a lot better return from it. So this is a little closer to home. It's all about experiential learning. This is something that David Porter is dealing with in Ontario right now with the Highly Skilled Workforce Initiative. A big theme of that is get people to apply their skills, and that's when that's when they know they've really learned it. And there's some rules for people to follow, whether you're in post-secondary, whether you're in governments or employers. This is a study from the Western US basically talking about what does non-completion of a program really mean? Well, could it mean that they've got what they wanted and they went away? Could it mean that they didn't really want the diploma? They got what they basically wanted, which is to take that next step in their career. And basically this is sort of paving the way for things like alternative credentials. Disruptions already hit us in terms of the MOOCs that are out there and the credentialing of courses that you might take in a MOOC. Just a couple of examples here. Am I going too fast? Is this a good pace? Yes, actually that is, I've got a bit.ly link right now. You can follow along. That's a good point. At the break, I'll give you the bit.ly link that you can follow along with it. Okay. Nano degrees out of Udacity. So the idea here is there are volatile skill sets that are needed right now. They haven't got time to put a 2-year program together. These would be 2, 4, 6 months programs, and the person gets it, whether it's say in big data, and they take the course, and that gets them their job at Amazon. That gets them their job at Google, because people want that skill set right now. LinkedIn Learning. This is basically everybody knew about lynda.com, very successful learning resources that got bought out by LinkedIn, who in turn got bought out by Microsoft. And so now it's all about business graphs of the world. So basically they want to know, if you watch that lynda.com video, let's look at you 3 years further on. Did that have a good positive effect on your career, and how many other people had a positive effect on their career? I think there are other players who can be doing this. This is a huge siloed approach right now, and basically if they own this data, they can make a ton of money from it. But I think other players should be involved in this, and it should be done in more open ways. This is just a quick slide from the US talking about professional credentialing, primarily in the health sector, and basically saying they're moving away from paper, and they're remixing credentialing information for such things as induction or onboarding, HR planning, performance review, accreditation, and this notion of the key notion there is continuous credentialing. It's not where you get it now and maybe you have to renew in 5 years. It's a more constant sort of drip feed of development. This is my rant about paper. I see paper as a silo. I see it as a very opaque proxy. It often needs other documents to back it up. You can't sort of click on a piece of paper and go somewhere else like you can with some other things. And there's a real lack. It tends to be a real lack of granularity. You can't clip coupons off your credential like you can from a bond. There tends to be, and it's very much focused on the formal. It's not focused on the experiential. This person has this piece of paper. Well, what can they do? And it's difficult to share, easy to lose. So co-curricular transcripts. Is anybody involved with co-curricular records, co-curricular transcripts? So I think that's a wonderful idea, but I tend to be very disappointed in the execution of it. I think there's a lot of effort that goes into identifying experiences and possibly even assessing those experiences. But why does it end up on another piece of paper that somebody puts in front of an employer? It should be a lot more granular. So, which brings us to open badges and microportfolios, and this is where I hand off to Nate.
Cool, thank you, Don. So as Don mentioned, I'm Nate Otto. I am the lead technical architect for the Open Badges standard at the IMS Global Working Group, and I also develop software at a company down in Eugene, Oregon called Concentric Sky. Open Badges have existed since around 2011. They came out of some really pioneering work at the Mozilla Foundation, supported by MacArthur. The idea was, let us take this idea of digital badges that exists in a bunch of different worlds that are periphery to education, such as gaming, educational gaming particularly, where we have these visual symbols of accomplishment, and let's pack those with metadata about real-world achievements and make it so that many different organizations around the world can use a common standard for how that data gets into and associated with these visual symbols of accomplishment, so that we can begin to really understand a wider range of achievements across this life-wide learning that everyone really goes through. But much of this is not credentialed yet, and we need to understand as the economy diversifies the connections between the informal learning spaces, the peer-driven spaces, and the formal education experiences that people go through. So open badges today can be used for many things. This ecosystem has grown a lot in the last 5 years since the project originated. We have dozens of companies that are building interoperable software implementations. And so if you want to use a credentialing record that is understood across a wide ecosystem, open badges is the choice. The whole community is coming together, from academic research organizations to for-profit companies, nonprofit education providers, higher ed institutions, K-12, after school. So many different parts of the market are coming together around this one technology to represent learning. And so a couple of the examples Don put on the slide here of what open badges are representing for people today. They can represent progress markers toward objectives, and when you've gotten particular objectives, such as demonstrations of skills, certifications, these can be formal or very informal. And open badges, while they can be formal achievements, they can also be really fun. You've got that visual symbol of that accomplishment right there. You can really play with the visual design. It's very tied into the branding of an organization. So for example, IBM runs a badging program that they use for HR internally. One of the uses Don mentioned, where they are building teams in their company, and they're using it to really understand what are the different skills that our base of 30,000 employees across this organization has. And when we have the need to spin up a new project, how do we build a team around that project quickly? When we no longer have barriers of that this team all needs to be in the same office, we could have some people here in Oregon, we could have some in India. What we need is a team that can work together very well and has the skills to do a particular job. So that's the idea with open badges. You can represent any skill with this, and you can cut across huge market sectors and really connect learning to one another. The trick is that you need to have what's called a learning recognition network built around your badges. They need to be understood. There's sort of the old cliche of, if you chop a tree down in the forest but no one was listening for it, did it make a sound? If you put data into a badge but no one knows to look for your data and no one really understands it, did that credential actually mean anything for the users? So in order to have effective badge systems, and you can see some of these principles in that DPD card deck and the Sprout Fund card deck and the design canvas, you need to have a bunch of different elements in your program design, and that includes representatives of different roles in the system. You have to have educators who are providing learning experiences and assessing them. You have to have learners who are engaged with content and these disciplines. And then you also have to have a connection with the consumers of that information, who may be employers in the workforce who are looking for employees who have specific skills. And you have to bring all those folks together around some common definitions for what it is that makes valuable credentials in that specialty. Don, did you have anything else about the intersection of these elements here?
Yeah, this is something, there's an advocate for open badges called Doug Belshaw, who had a diagram here, and we've just changed it a little bit, mostly in terms of colors. But it's just to show the domain of it, and just to say that not all digital badges are open badges. What makes an open badge open is the standard that makes it portable, so you can make it here, consume it here, regardless of the system, a bit like PDF or a bit like email. So it doesn't matter the program that does it, as long as it aligns to the one standard. And then the idea that they don't have to be micro-credentials. They often are micro-credentials, but they can also basically signal other things such as achievements, and even membership, or even claims, or affiliations. Um, that little symbol up at the top is a doggy biscuit, and you notice it's outside of open badges. So digital badges can be used as dog biscuits, but it's not something I support. For me, they are signals of what someone knows and can do, and they're not so much a pat on the head for doing something that you were supposed to do. So yeah.
Yeah, so you can think of many different possible uses, and I hope by the end of the day that you have some really concrete ideas about how open badges and open recognition techniques can fit with your organization. And don't think of yourself only as an issuer of those badges. I also encourage you to think about how can you use these technologies to understand the learning that is happening in your community. To be able to fill all of those different roles at once, as an earner of badge, a consumer of badges, or as an issuer. Because in the open badges ecosystem, the open means that anyone can do it and anyone can fill any of these roles. The idea is that we are all lifelong learners, and at different times we've got credentials that fit into all of these different categories. You can use badges in well-designed systems to understand your own progress, forward plan about what you want to do next, and also to share where you've been and connect with others. So here's an example of one digital badge. This is awarded by CAPLA here in Canada. It's a bootcamp badge, and you can see the types of metadata that come along with an achievement. And maybe Don will say something about this specific badge in a second, but I'll talk a little bit to the standard here. That there's a common set of metadata that is associated with the badge. That includes, of course, the image, which is the visual symbol, but then there are a set of other fields such as name, description, and then all important criteria of what it actually takes to earn this badge in detail. There's always a link where you can go to a website that lists out exactly what it takes to earn a badge. And as part of our standardization efforts, one of the key things that we work on in the Open Badges Working Group at IMS Global is to talk to stakeholders about what type of information they want to see in badges, so that we can make sure that if you put information in a badge, that there is someone on the other side of that equation who's looking for that information. So an example of that is in the forthcoming 2.0 specifications that I helped author last year, and are now being finalized through IMS Global. There, we have the ability to embed criteria information directly in the badge in a machine-readable way. Right now, we have this limitation that there's a link there, and you have to click the link, and a human has to go read what this badge means. But we're coming up with the ways to actually embed information so it could be displayed right on the screen in any Open Badges compatible application. That's the type of work that needs to happen to have a common web standard that meets the needs of all these different stakeholders, so that you can get a usable representation of learning right there on the screen. And so open badges are, they've got all this metadata. They're also verifiable. You can tell that this badge actually belongs to a specific individual. There's an email address encoded into that badge, so that if you pick it up off the street, you're not going to be able to tell whose it is, because it does protect the identity of the recipient. But if you know the identity of the recipient who is presenting you the badge, you can verify, oh yes, this badge was awarded by this organization to this person, and here's all the data about what it means.
Just to say that Patrick Donahoe, who's the chair of CAPLA, will be talking about this badging experience, and it's got some interesting things they learned from doing the experience as an organization. So, and this is basically, I earned this badge, and I'm quite proud of it. And this is how I can display my badge. A couple of ways I can display my badge. Badges and e-portfolios. We're going to have Tracy Penny-Light talk about badges and e-portfolios a little later today. These are my badges in my Mahara e-portfolio as a cluster. And so the CAPLA badge is one of them. And you can click on it directly in the page, and it's like flipping the certificate over. You see the criteria as Nate showed you in the previous slide. Over on the right is another way of presenting badged information or curating badge information. How many people have heard of the backpack, Mozilla Backpack? Okay, so the passport is somewhat similar to the backpack. It's an alternative to the backpack. You can drag badges into it. In this case, you can also intersperse it with other information that adds value. Could be text curation, could be uploaded documents, could be embedded videos. So it becomes a bit of a micro, sort of a brochure, portfolio brochure. And that's just a couple of options. Here's another option, the big silo, the monster silo that's out there. This is my badge, my RPL Bootcamp badge in my LinkedIn profile. And again, it works out the same way. You can typically share them in other forms of social media as well, typically often as streams rather than profiles. I think that's an area that could be improved, where badges would be more available in profiles, and so be more permanent, more findable right away. Nate was talking about the skills. Actually, maybe I'll pass back over to you for this, Nate, and you can talk about because you were talking about this already.
Cool. So one point to the last slide, or in that you have options about what software you use with Open Badges. It's an open standard. That means that there are many different pieces of software out there that perform the different roles. The Mozilla Backpack is one to organize and earn your badges, but the Open Badge Passport and Badger are others. Any software developer can build an application that performs either an issuer, a consumer, or an earner role in this ecosystem. And users don't have to be locked into a particular platform. If they decide, oh, hey, there's another piece of software over here that works better for me, they can take their badges right over to it. They're not ever locked into one particular solution, which is really like what we want to build in the educational space, because we want to promote free access, equity, all sorts of great values around that. So the little napkin sketch here shows a little bit of the process of how a user goes from earning a badge to displaying it to particular consumers of that badge. They can get badges from various different spheres of their life, from interest groups, from formal employment and formal education, any other place where learning is recognized. Because open badges are the common technology to recognize learning. They get those as portable image files, which they can store in a backpack service. And then from that backpack service, they share out to particular consumers of that information. And they can, this is all under, the sharing is all under control of the earner, where they can select and choose the specific achievements that they want to share for a specific purpose. So you have a job application today. I'm going to pick these badges from my professional learning. I've got a club membership application tomorrow. I'm going to pick some others from my interests. But the idea is that the learner is in control, and the learner can choose their own tools with which to make this connection with the consumers who are important to validate that learning in their life.
So just we're sort of heading into the summing up point, and just to say that it's technically it's a portable smart graphic that's embedded with structured data, and that is becoming even more machine readable and links out to supporting information and evidence. It can be used for formative assessment. Actually, there's somebody at the University of Warwick has said something really good about this, basically saying it can be used to look back on what you've accomplished and to reflect on what you've got. And because these are artifacts that enable you to bring up your memories of what you learned when you earned that particular badge. And so I thought that was a very nice way of describing it. They can also typically be used for summative assessment, and so typically for goals. But essentially it's a digital standard for recognizing and sharing achievements. Can be used to, Nate has spoken to some of these things, can be used for game mechanics. I get a little iffy sometimes with that. It can be used to recognize status. So, for example, we're going to be talking later today about the Open Recognition Alliance and the Bologna Open Recognition Declaration. Basically, we're encouraging people to sign this declaration online and then claim a badge of it. So it's not like I learned something, it's more like I support this. This relates to my values. So we think that's an important use of it. And I mentioned keeping the artifacts and tracking progress. Nate was talking about supporting personal learning pathways. I think that might be a theme that might emerge, especially from the breakouts today. If we talk about, it's not just the badge, it's the path to the badge and how you get there and how you can support alternative paths to basically a learning achievement. This is something, is it readable at the back? I hope so. Basically, Penn State has been doing some really interesting work with badges, and I really like this framework, talking about the ways it can be used in a post-secondary context. Basically, what they're saying is it can be used in a curricular way, so within a course. It can be used cross-curricular, so that's where you're getting into graduate learning outcomes and program learning outcomes. It can be used co-curricular, so we were talking about co-curricular records. There are people now doing co-curricular badges. Open curricular, that more relates to things like MOOCs and or open educational resources that somebody might engage with and then choose to be assessed against and earn a badge thereby. It can be used for professional development. I mentioned that in the health sector, typically continuing professional development, although some associations are simply using it as membership badges. This membership is good until 2018 June 30th, and then it's no longer good. So that's something that can be shared over social networks and help that person's career. Certifications is another one. So in other words, it's great that you're an engineer, but are you qualified to work in this particular area? That's something that can get layered on top of the big credential. Nate, maybe you can speak to the statistics of where things are at.
Sure, yeah. And as you look at these purposes of how badges can be used within an institution or by an institution, do keep in mind, what are the roles here? Who is the issuer, who's the earner, and who's the consumer of this badge? And what you'll discover as you look at some of those purposes is that sometimes those roles overlap. So like in the cross-curricular badge recognition case that Penn State identified, you can see that the same institution is both the issuer and consumer of those badges. They're understanding achievements that happened in one part of the learning pathway in this course over in another part of the pathway. There's some really cool examples, especially that connect parts of the organization that are not necessarily traditionally thought of as providing learning. One great example is the libraries, which are actually in the 21st century doing a great job providing information literacy instruction. They're connecting the learning that's happening in many different courses. And so if you use badges to have a common learning pathway across multiple courses that can bring in all the different academic support departments and resources within institutions, you can really not only understand a student's learning journey, but you can help support it in new exciting ways that can build on their successes across those different opportunities. So where are we as an Open Badges community? Over 10 million badges issued, thousands of issuers, hundreds of thousands of earners. And I'll add to that point, dozens of implementations of software that is compatible with the Open Badges standard, and high participation in meetings like this about how do I use badges, and also meetings that occur around the idea of where does the technology go next. So for example, in Orlando coming up at the end of this month, there is an Open Badges Summit led by IMS Global for open to the public for a summit day, and then we dive into technical discussions for the rest of the week about where we take the next implementations of the standard. So overall, the Open Badges ecosystem is a very healthy ecosystem with a lot of promise for where it's going. And the amount of interest within institutions of higher learning and youth learning is growing very rapidly. So as your institutions grow interested in recognizing learning with open technologies, definitely pay attention to what is going on in the Open Badges ecosystem, what the technical providers are offering, and dive right in. So early adoption hotspots called out here on the slide. For youth, this is a really interesting opportunity to provide connections between the different learning opportunities in young people's lives. Not only their achievements and skills that they're gaining in school, but also the cultural institutions in their cities. So great examples from the Cities of Learning program, LRNG now as it's known, where they are connecting organizations like museums, libraries, after-school clubs with employers and schools in their community to show how students' learning connects across these spaces and to make opportunities available to those students. But learning does not end at the end of your formal schooling. Once you're in workforce, there is continuing education to stay up to date, and badges are a great fit for that. We see also a lot of professional development requirements, especially in the education market, where many institutions that are getting interested in issuing badges, they don't start by issuing badges to students in the institution. They start by issuing badges to the educators for the professional development requirements that those educators have. And badges make a great fit for that case because you get out of these paper silos. The transmission process of this credential is streamlined and digital and can feed right into machine readable solutions. And so by integrating open badges into that process, you get rid of a lot of paperwork that the front desk has to do. Product training. So another great category, business soft skills. I mean, like a lot of the skills gap slides that we showed earlier had essentially these skills that are a little bit hard to assess, don't really have yet perfectly agreed upon definitions. And what badges can do is they can help build momentum in a community around some common definitions and some common educational opportunities that can lead to recognition for soft skills, and just overall better understanding of the soft skills and 21st century skills that various different members of your community have. And then, of course, we see badges for all the purposes we mentioned before: certification and specific assessment-based badges, where you sign up for an assessment, maybe pay, and then you get your record of assessment in the form of a portable digital badge instead of a paper certificate that you've got to, I don't know, notarize and send off to the various consumers. Send a verifiable digital badge instead.
Actually, Nate talked about a lot of these examples. So there's Cities of Learning is growing like topsy across the states. Actually, they went into their second tranche of cities, and quite a number of cities. I think it's about 18 cities are involved right now, and I think they're working on a third tranche of that. Some examples of professionalization in PD, unregulated and regulated, just to make that point. And this extended enterprise learning, and have I got the picture of that? No, I've got a picture later on of the extended enterprise. I think that's a key threshold concept for people. But basically, IBM is going great guns. I've got an example later on talking about the success they've had with people with the IBM tool set, and also it works with them in terms of talent pipelines, engaging people early with IBM products and IBM services. Continuing education, that's in a sense it's an easy one because they typically exist partly in a sense outside the institution and can to some extent operate autonomously and just basically go where they can be more agile and go where the need is and still provide some of the underlying brand of the institution that they're embedded within. Early adoption in Canada, there's a little bit of experimentation in the federal public service. There's actually locally here an organization called Roy Group that was inspired by Sir John Daniel because his daughter was working there. He was saying you should look at these open badges, and they're having great success with the leadership programs and recognizing leadership programs. People are doing health and safety. The BTM one is interesting. I think I've got an example of that a bit later on. UBC has been experimenting with them, St. Lawrence College. Ryerson, that's more in the continuing professional studies. Learn Quebec is sort of the K to 12 area. They're doing some PD. Calgary, more behind the perimeter. George Brown College was experimenting with it. That's on hold right now. But just some examples. We basically talked about most of this stuff. Basically, this is kind of a shooting to the end. If you thought badges were interesting, here are some questions you should be asking yourself. What behaviors am I trying to encourage? What recognition am I trying to add? How am I adding value to what I'm doing already? Um, what's the worth of the badges? What can they buy for the person who earns them? Or is it just recognition within that particular context? Who supports them? How can we bring them on board? Is it just a bottom-up thing? Is it just within a particular department? Or can we go a little wider, or even outside the walls of the institution or the organization that you may be in? And how can we make this sustainable? How do we know that 3 years from now this program will still be there, let alone growing? So different ways of getting started. Nate has talked about this. I would suggest that you get involved personally if you want to do it and start earning some badges and see how they make you feel, and then start working in very small ways to actually start issuing badges rather than thinking you know what it is because you understand in your mind how it works. I think you need to feel what badges feel like if you're going to come up with an authentic system. There are a number of technology choices you can make. You can go your own route. You can do it totally within a learning management system, although there are pros and cons to that. And you can go with cloud services. You can go the open source route. You can go a number of different ways. If you want to learn more about open badges and earn a badge doing so, this course, OB 101, from the Think Out Loud Club, I mentioned Doug Belshaw before. You can earn this badge online. And they're actually also starting a boot camp. I just saw that the other day. I'm not sure all the details of that. But essentially, they're consultants who don't work with one particular platform, but they very much support the standard, and it's a great place to learn and work with others. So we're about 5 minutes behind, but not too bad. I hope you were writing down strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, because we'd love to see them. Love to see your feedback on this. We're going to take the next 10 minutes or so and give you the opportunity to put them up. We've got poster saying strengths, poster saying weaknesses. I don't see the threats. Oh, we didn't have time. Okay. All right. And we'll set up, and it'll be sort of a mini break, and we'll pick up at 10 o'clock with the next section.